3 weeks after their meeting with the bank, the Broken Arrow Ranch had been transformed into a construction zone. Maria stood in the barn at dawn, surveying the controlled chaos of their preparation efforts. Portable bathroom facilities sat waiting for final hookup, safety railings had been installed around all elevated areas, and the main barn space had been cleared and organized to accommodate group activities. The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. Maria's savings account had dwindled faster than anticipated as they discovered that every improvement seemed to require 3 additional safety modifications. The electrical system needed upgrading to handle increased capacity. The well water required testing and filtration for public use. And the insurance company had demanded additional security measures that ate into their budget. But they were making progress. Dr. Chin's medical group retreat was scheduled for the following weekend, and they had confirmed bookings for 2 additional groups in the following month. Word was spreading through Helena's professional community about the unique rural retreat experience being developed at the Morrison Ranch. Jake appeared in the barn doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking more energetic than Maria had seen him since Sarah's death. The past 3 weeks of intensive work had been good for him, giving him a concrete focus for his grief and worry. The fence repair crew should be here around 8, he said, handing Maria her coffee. And Dorothy's bringing the kids back from her place around noon. Emma and Tommy had been staying with their grandmother during the most intensive construction phase, though they visited daily to check on progress and contribute their own ideas to the project. Emma had become their unofficial expert consultant on what Mama would want, while Tommy had appointed himself as the official tester of all child safety features. "How are you feeling about next weekend?" Maria asked, settling onto a hay bale beside Jake. "Terrified and excited in equal measure," Jake admitted. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't imagine how we'd host 20 people for dinner, let alone an entire weekend retreat. "You've been amazing through all this," Maria said. "Sarah would be proud of how you've stepped up." Jake was quiet for a moment. "I keep having this feeling like she's watching all this happen. Not in a spooky way, but like she's pleased that her plans are finally being implemented." "Maybe she is watching," Maria said gently. "Maybe that's why everything's been falling into place despite all the obstacles." The past 3 weeks had indeed seen a series of fortunate coincidences that had helped their project succeed. A local contractor had offered reduced rates in exchange for being their preferred vendor for future groups. A retired nurse from town had volunteered to provide basic first aid coverage for retreats in exchange for reduced rates on her own family's future visits. Even the weather had cooperated, giving them clear skies for most of their outdoor construction work. "Maria," Jake said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever you decide is okay." Maria felt her stomach tighten. "What is it? When we started this, you said you'd stay until you knew we were going to be okay. I'm starting to think we might actually make it work, which means eventually you're going to want to get back to your own life, your nursing school plans." The question Maria had been avoiding was finally on the table. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd become so integrated into the Morrison family's daily life that it was hard to imagine what came next for her personally. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted. "The truth is, I'm not sure what I want anymore. When I came here, nursing school felt like the obvious next step. But this work, helping build something sustainable for your family, it feels important in a way I wasn't expecting." "But you can't put your life on hold indefinitely for us," Jake said. "Who says I'd be putting my life on hold? Maybe this is my life now." They were interrupted by the arrival of the fence crew, and the moment for deeper conversation was lost in the logistics of directing work crews and coordinating deliveries. But Maria found herself thinking about Jake's question throughout the morning as she supervised the installation of safety features and reviewed final preparations for their first retreat. Around noon, Dorothy arrived with Emma and Tommy, both children eager to see the progress that had been made in their absence. Emma ran straight to the barn's new education area, where they'd set up displays about sustainable farming and ranch life using many of Sarah's research materials. "It looks like a real learning place," Emma said with satisfaction. "Like where Mama always said she wanted to teach people about taking care of land." Tommy was more interested in testing the safety rail system, climbing up and down the barn's loft access ladder, while Jake nervously supervised. The 5-year-old had no fear of heights, a trait that both impressed and terrified the adults responsible for his safety. "Can I show the doctor people how to milk a cow?" Tommy asked. "I know how, even though we don't have cows anymore." "We might be able to arrange something," Maria said, making a mental note to contact neighboring ranchers about borrowing livestock for educational demonstrations. That afternoon brought a visit from Richard Henley, the bank loan officer, who had requested a tour of their preparations before final approval of their loan modification. Maria felt her anxiety spike as she watched Henley examine their safety improvements and review their business documentation. "I have to admit, I'm impressed with what you've accomplished in 3 weeks," Henley said as they concluded the tour. "This is significantly more professional than I anticipated when we first discussed your proposal." "Does that mean the bank will approve our modification?" Jake asked. "I'll be recommending approval to my regional manager," Henley confirmed. "You've demonstrated both the viability of your business concept and the commitment to make it succeed. Assuming your first few events go well, I think we can work out a long-term payment structure that accommodates the seasonal nature of your income." After Henley left, the family celebrated with a dinner of pizza delivered from town, the first relaxed meal they'd shared in weeks. As they sat around the kitchen table, Maria found herself thinking about how natural it felt to be part of their daily routine. "Maria," Emma said during dessert, "when the doctor people come this weekend, will you tell them the story about the baby bird we buried?" "Why would you want me to tell them that story?" Emma considered this seriously. "Because it shows that sometimes sad things happen, but you can still take care of what's important." The 8-year-old's insight struck Maria as profoundly wise. The story of their attempt to save an injured bird had become, in Emma's understanding, a metaphor for their efforts to save the ranch and preserve their family's stability. "I think that's a beautiful idea," Maria said. "Maybe you could tell them the story yourself?" Emma's eyes went wide. "Do you think I could?" "I think you'd be the perfect person to explain what this ranch means to families who need a safe place to call home." That evening, as Maria prepared materials for the weekend retreat, she realized that Emma's story about the injured bird would actually be perfect for their programming. It demonstrated the ranch's commitment to caring for all living things, while also acknowledging that sometimes loss was inevitable, but didn't have to mean the end of hope. The weekend of Dr. Chin's retreat arrived with perfect weather and what felt like controlled chaos. 20 medical professionals arrived Friday evening, setting up tents in the designated camping area and gathering for an orientation session in the barn. Maria had been nervous about leading the programming, but she discovered that her combination of practical experience and genuine passion for the ranch's mission made her a natural presenter. She talked about sustainable living practices, the importance of agricultural education, and the therapeutic value of connecting with rural life. Jake surprised everyone, including himself, by proving to be an excellent logistics coordinator. His accounting background made him naturally good at managing schedules and ensuring that meals appeared on time and activities ran smoothly. But it was Emma and Tommy who stole the show. Emma's presentation about her mother's sustainable gardening practices captivated the adults, while Tommy's enthusiasm for ranch life was infectious as he led groups on explorations of the property. "This is exactly what our group needed," Dr. Chin told Maria on Saturday evening. "My staff works in high-stress situations every day, and being here reminds them why it's important to slow down and pay attention to the natural world." One of the retreat participants, Dr. James Martinez, a pediatric surgeon, pulled Maria aside after dinner. "I'd like to book a return visit for my own family. My kids would love this experience, and I think my wife would be interested in learning about sustainable farming practices." By Sunday afternoon, as the retreat participants packed up to return to Helena, Maria felt cautiously optimistic about their future prospects. The weekend had gone smoothly. The guests had been enthusiastic about their experience. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the mood in the Morrison household as Jake prepared for his meeting with the bank. Maria had been up since 4 a.m., unable to sleep as she mentally rehearsed arguments and alternatives they might present to the loan officer. Emma seemed to sense the tension in the air as Maria helped her get ready for school. The 8-year-old moved with unusual quiet, her normally chatty morning routine replaced by worried glances between her father and Maria. "Is something bad going to happen today?" Emma asked as Maria braided her hair. Maria paused, meeting the child's eyes in the bathroom mirror. She'd learned that Emma responded better to honesty than false reassurance. Your daddy has an important meeting today about the ranch. We're not sure what will happen, but we're going to do everything we can to keep your home safe. Emma nodded solemnly. Should I pray about it? The question caught Maria off guard. She wasn't particularly religious herself, but she recognized the comfort faith could provide during uncertain times. If that would make you feel better, I think that would be very nice. After getting the children off to school, Maria and Jake drove to the First National Bank of Helena in tense silence. Jake had dressed in his best suit, though Maria could see his hands trembling as he gripped the steering wheel. Whatever happens in there, we don't accept their first offer, Maria said as they pulled into the parking lot. Banks always have more flexibility than they initially admit. The loan officer, Richard Henley, was a thin man in his 50s who looked like he'd foreclosed on plenty of family farms without losing sleep over it. He greeted them with professional politeness that didn't quite mask his impatience with what he clearly saw as an inevitable conclusion to a failed loan. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate you coming in on short notice, Henley said, gesturing for them to sit across from his desk. As I mentioned to Mrs. Patterson on Friday, we need to discuss the status of your mortgage and develop a timeline for resolution. Jake straightened his shoulders, and Maria could see him fighting to project confidence he didn't feel. Mr. Henley, I know we've fallen behind on payments, but I'm prepared to propose a solution that addresses both the arrears and our ongoing obligations. Henley raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. I'm listening. For the next 20 minutes, Jake and Maria presented their plan for the agritourism operation. They had prepared financial projections, research on comparable businesses, and a detailed timeline for implementation. Maria had printed out examples of successful ranch tourism operations from across Montana and the surrounding states. Henley listened with the expression of someone humoring delusional clients, occasionally asking questions that seemed designed more to highlight problems than to understand possibilities. Mr. Morrison, while I appreciate your creativity in addressing this situation, the bank can't base loan modifications on theoretical income from an untested business venture. We need concrete assets and proven income streams. What about the land value? Maria interjected. This ranch has been appraised at twice the amount of the outstanding mortgage. In a normal market, yes, Henley agreed. But ranch properties in this area have been struggling for sale for months. We can't count on recovering full value in a foreclosure situation, which is why we prefer to work with borrowers to find alternative solutions. Jake leaned forward. What kind of alternative solutions? Henley consulted his files before responding. The bank would be willing to accept a deed in lieu of foreclosure, which would release you from further obligation on the debt. You'd need to be moved out by the end of next month, but you wouldn't face the credit implications of a formal foreclosure. Maria felt anger rising in her chest. That's not a solution. That's just a gentler way of taking someone's home. Ms. Santos, I understand your emotional investment in this situation, but the bank has fiduciary responsibilities to our shareholders and depositors. We can't maintain non-performing loans indefinitely. Give us 90 days, Jake said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been all morning. 90 days to bring the account current and prove that the agritourism concept can generate sustainable income. Henley shook his head. Mr. Morrison, you're already 4 months behind on payments. That represents nearly $8,000 in arrears, plus penalties and fees. Can you realistically expect to generate that kind of cash flow in 90 days from a business that doesn't exist yet? Maria looked at Jake, knowing they were reaching the moment when everything either came together or fell apart. Yes, she said firmly. We can. Ms. Santos, with respect, optimism doesn't pay mortgages. No, but capital investment does, Maria replied. I'm prepared to personally guarantee the arrears and provide the initial investment for the agritourism operation. What I need from the bank is time to make it work. Henley's demeanor shifted slightly, his dismissive attitude replaced by professional calculation. You're talking about a personal investment of what magnitude? $25,000, Maria said, the number coming out of her mouth before she'd fully considered it. It represented nearly all of her savings, money she'd planned to use for nursing school and living expenses. Jake turned to stare at her, clearly shocked by both the amount and her willingness to risk it. And you'd be willing to put that in writing? Henley asked. A personal guarantee for the existing arrears plus sufficient capital to fund this business venture? Yes, Maria said, her heart pounding but her voice steady. In exchange for a 90-day moratorium on foreclosure proceedings and a restructured payment plan that reflects the seasonal nature of agritourism income. Henley was quiet for several minutes, reviewing files and making calculations on his computer. Finally, he looked up with an expression that was marginally less hostile than before. I'll need to discuss this with my regional manager, but, provisionally, I think we could work something out. The bank would require monthly progress reports, proof of business licensing and insurance, and financial documentation for all revenue streams. And, Ms. Santos, your personal guarantee would need to be secured by assets equal to the guaranteed amount. Maria's mouth went dry. Securing the guarantee would mean putting her car, her remaining savings, essentially everything she owned on the line for a family she'd known for less than 2 weeks. That's acceptable, she heard herself saying. They spent another hour working through the details of a provisional agreement. Henley would present their proposal to his superiors, and they'd have an answer within a week. If approved, Maria would have 30 days to provide the guaranteed funds and documentation for the business venture. As they walked out of the bank, Jake was unnaturally quiet. He didn't speak until they were both in the truck, and when he did, his voice was thick with emotion. Maria, what did you just do in there? I bought us time, she said, though she was beginning to understand the full weight of her commitment. You just risked your entire future for a family you barely know, Jake said. Why would you do that? Maria stared out at the Montana landscape rolling past the truck windows, thinking about how to explain a decision that didn't entirely make sense even to her. My mother worked her whole life just to survive, she said finally. She never had the chance to build something lasting, something that could be passed on to the next generation. Sarah Morrison did have that chance, and she built something beautiful. I can't stand by and watch it disappear just because circumstances got difficult. Jake pulled the truck over to the side of the road and turned to face her. Maria, if this doesn't work, you could lose everything. If we don't try, you definitely will lose everything, she countered. At least this way there's hope. They drove the rest of the way home in contemplative silence, both of them processing the magnitude of what they'd just committed to. Maria found herself mentally calculating everything that would need to happen in the next 90 days to make their plan work. When they arrived at the ranch, they found Dorothy waiting with Emma and Tommy, who had been dismissed early from school due to a power outage. The children ran to greet them, and Maria could see Emma searching their faces for clues about how the meeting had gone. We have 90 days, Jake announced. 90 days to prove we can make this work. Dorothy's relief was visible. How did you manage that? Maria and Jake exchanged a look before Jake explained the arrangement they'd negotiated. Dorothy listened with growing amazement and concern, particularly when she understood the extent of Maria's financial commitment. Maria, honey, you can't risk your life savings on this, Dorothy said gently. This family means the world to me, but I can't ask you to sacrifice everything for us. You're not asking, Maria replied. I'm choosing. There's a difference. That afternoon, while the children played outside, the adults spread Sarah's business plans across the kitchen table and began the serious work of turning theoretical ideas into practical reality. They had 90 days to establish a viable agritourism operation, and they would need every one of them. First things first, Maria said, making notes on a legal pad. We need to get the ranch properly licensed and insured for public access. That means safety inspections, liability coverage, and probably some kind of business entity registration. Jake nodded, his accountant training kicking in. I can handle the paperwork and licensing requirements. What about the physical improvements? We'll need to prioritize based on safety and basic functionality, Maria said. Secure fencing around areas where guests will be present, basic bathroom facilities accessible from the barn area, and a safe space for people to park vehicles. Dorothy had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. What about Sarah's garden area? It's completely overgrown now, but it was beautiful when she maintained it. People might enjoy learning about sustainable gardening practices. That's a great idea, Maria agreed. Educational programming around sustainable living could be a major draw for urban visitors. They spent the rest of the afternoon developing a priority list for the next 30 days. Safety improvements first, then basic amenities, then enhanced programming and marketing. It was an aggressive timeline, but not impossible if they could maintain focus and momentum. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway as they were wrapping up their planning session. "Can I help with anything?" "Actually, yes," Maria said, struck by sudden inspiration. "You know more about your mama's garden and horse care knowledge than any of us. Would you be willing to help develop educational materials for children who visit the ranch?" Emma's face lit up with pride and purpose. "I could show them how to braid horsetails and which plants are good for pollinators, like Mama taught me." "That would be perfect," Maria said. "What about you, Tommy? What could you teach visiting children?" Tommy considered this seriously. "I know where all the best hiding spots are, and I can catch grasshoppers without hurting them." "Those are both very useful skills," Maria agreed solemnly. That evening, after the children were in bed, Maria found Jake sitting on the front porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. She joined him on the steps, both of them quiet for several minutes. "I keep thinking about what Sarah would say about all this," Jake said finally. "What do you think she'd say?" "Probably that I'm crazy for letting someone I barely know risk everything for us." Jake paused. "But also maybe that it's about time I stopped trying to handle everything alone." Maria thought about that. "From what I've heard about Sarah, I think she'd be proud of you for being willing to fight for what she built." "And what about you?" Jake asked. "What would your mother say about what you're doing?" Maria smiled in the darkness. "She'd probably say I inherited her talent for getting myself into impossible situations. But also that sometimes impossible situations are where the most important work gets done." The next morning brought their first real test of the new arrangement. Maria woke to find Emma's bed empty and the little girl nowhere in the house. After several minutes of increasingly frantic searching, she found Emma in the barn, sitting in what had been Sarah's office area, crying quietly. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Maria asked, settling beside the 8-year-old on an overturned crate. "I had a bad dream," Emma said. "I dreamed that we had to move away and leave Mama behind. In the dream, she couldn't find us because we weren't at home anymore." Maria's heart ached for the child's fear and confusion. "Oh, honey, your mama isn't stuck here at the ranch. She's always with you, no matter where you go." "But all her favorite places are here," Emma protested. "Her garden, the barn where she worked on projects, the tree where she and Daddy got married. If we leave, who will take care of those places?" The question revealed the depth of Emma's anxiety about their situation. She wasn't just afraid of losing her home. She was afraid of abandoning her responsibility to preserve her mother's memory. "Emma, what if I told you that we're going to do everything we can to make sure you don't have to leave? That all these people are working together to keep your home safe?" Emma looked up with tear-filled eyes. "But what if it doesn't work?" Maria chose her words carefully. "Then we'll figure out another way. But, sweetheart, your mama's memory lives in you and Tommy and your daddy, not just in this place. Wherever you go, she goes with you." They sat together for a while, watching the sun rise through the barn's east-facing windows. Maria found herself thinking about the weight of responsibility she'd taken on. It wasn't just about saving a ranch or helping a struggling family. It was about preserving a child's sense of security and connection to her deceased mother. "Maria," Emma said quietly, "if you help us keep the ranch, does that mean you'll stay here forever?" The question caught Maria off guard. In all her planning and financial commitments, she hadn't thought much about the long-term implications of her involvement with the Morrison family. She'd focused on the immediate crisis without considering what success might look like. "I don't know about forever, sweetheart. But I promise I won't leave until I know you and Tommy and your daddy are going to be okay." Emma seemed satisfied with that answer, and they walked back to the house together as Jake was starting breakfast. He took one look at his daughter's red-rimmed eyes and gave Maria a questioning glance. "Just some worries about the future," Maria explained quietly while Emma went to wash her face. "She's carrying a lot for an 8-year-old. Jake nodded grimly. "They both are. I keep trying to shield them from the adult stuff, but kids always know more than we think they do." The rest of the morning was spent on phone calls and research as they began the process of establishing their business. Maria contacted insurance companies while Jake researched licensing requirements. Dorothy arrived mid-morning to watch Tommy and help with the increasingly complex logistics of their venture. By noon, they had quotes for liability insurance, a list of required permits, and contact information for a dozen potential suppliers for everything from portable bathroom facilities to educational materials. The costs were adding up quickly, but they were still within the range of what Maria had committed to invest. "I think we can do this," Jake said as they reviewed their progress over lunch. "It's going to be tight, and we'll have to work around the clock, but I think we can actually pull this off." Maria felt a surge of optimism mixed with terror. They were really doing this, committing everything to a dream that had existed only in Sarah Morrison's notebooks until a week ago. That afternoon brought their first potential customer. Dr. Rebecca Chun, a pediatrician from Helena, called in response to a query Maria had sent to local professional organizations about team-building retreat opportunities. "We're looking for something authentic," Dr. Chun explained over the phone. "Our medical group wants to spend a weekend learning about sustainable living practices while building team cohesion. Could your ranch accommodate 20 people for a weekend retreat?" Maria looked around the barn, trying to imagine 20 medical professionals camping and learning about ranch life. "When were you thinking about scheduling this?" "We're flexible, but ideally sometime in the next 6 weeks." 6 weeks. Maria felt her mouth go dry as she calculated everything that would need to be accomplished to host 20 guests safely and professionally. "Let me discuss this with my partner and get back to you with details," Maria said, buying time to figure out if they could possibly be ready. After ending the call, she found Jake and explained the opportunity. His reaction mirrored her own mix of excitement and panic. 20 people in 6 weeks, he said. "Maria, we don't even have basic bathroom facilities set up yet." "But it's perfect," Maria countered. "Medical professionals would be interested in educational programming around sustainable living and stress reduction through outdoor activities. And if we can successfully host one group, word of mouth could generate more bookings." Jake was quiet for a moment, running mental calculations. "We'd need to rent portable facilities, arrange for catering, develop programming, and create sleeping accommodations for 20 people. The logistics alone would be massive. So we break it down into manageable pieces," Maria said. "What's the most critical element for making this work?" "Safety," Jake said immediately. "If someone gets hurt on our property, we're finished." "Okay, so we prioritize safety improvements first. What else?" They spent the next 2 hours creating a detailed timeline for preparing to host Dr. Chen's group. It would require working 16-hour days and probably calling in favors from every helpful neighbor Dorothy could identify. But it was possible. "Are we crazy for considering this?" Jake asked as they finished their planning. "Probably," Maria admitted. "But we're also out of time and alternatives. Sometimes crazy is the only option left." That evening, as Maria tucked Emma and Tommy into bed, Emma asked the question that had been hanging over all of their planning. "If lots of people come to visit our ranch, will we still have space for our family time?" It was a perceptive question from an 8-year-old, and it highlighted one of the fundamental challenges of their venture. How do you turn a family home into a business without losing what makes it special? "We'll make sure there's always space for family time," Maria promised. "The whole point of saving the ranch is to make sure it stays your home." As she turned off Emma's light, Maria realized that the child had identified the real test of their ambitious plan. Success wouldn't just be measured in dollars and guests, but in whether they could preserve the heart of what Sarah Morrison had built while transforming it into something that could sustain the family financially. Walking back to her room in Sarah's former office, Maria felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In less than a week, she'd gone from being a temporary cleaning lady to being financially and emotionally invested in the Morrison family's future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions, but tonight she allowed herself a moment of quiet optimism. They had a plan, they had support, and most importantly, they had a family worth fighting for. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen, but for the first time since arriving at the Broken Arrow Ranch, Maria felt like they had a real chance at success. Dorothy Patterson sat in stunned silence, her coffee cup forgotten in her hands as she processed Maria's unexpected proposal. Outside, Emma was pushing Tommy on the tire swing, their laughter filtering through the kitchen window like a sound from a happier time. "You're serious about this," Dorothy said finally, studying Maria's face for any sign of uncertainty. "Completely serious," Maria confirmed. "I've been thinking about it all night. I have some savings that can cover my expenses for a few months, and I was planning to take time off before starting nursing school anyway. Why not spend it here, helping a family that needs it?" Dorothy shook her head slowly. "Maria, I appreciate what you're offering, I truly do. But you don't understand the scope of what you're suggesting. This isn't just about babysitting for a few days while Jake recovers. This ranch is failing. The bills are piling up, equipment is breaking down faster than it can be repaired, and Jake hasn't been able to maintain the property the way it needs to be maintained. Then, maybe it's time for a fresh perspective," Maria said. "I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I've spent my whole life solving problems and making things work with limited resources. My mother raised 4 children on a secretary's salary after my father left. I put myself through college working 3 jobs. I know how to stretch a dollar and make something out of nothing." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment, watching her grandchildren through the window. "What did Jake say when you mentioned this idea to him?" "I haven't talked to him yet. I wanted to run it by you first, since you know the situation better than anyone." The older woman sighed deeply. "Jake's pride is part of the problem. He's been trying so hard to handle everything himself that he can barely accept help picking up groceries, let alone having a virtual stranger move in to help run his life." "Maybe that's exactly what he needs," Maria suggested. "Someone who isn't family, someone who doesn't have emotional investment in how things used to be, someone who can look at the situation objectively and help figure out what's actually possible." Dorothy studied Maria with new interest. "You really think there's a way to save this place?" "I think there might be," Maria said carefully. "Yesterday, when I was organizing the barn, I found some of Sarah's planning documents. Her projections for boarding horses, the ideas about sustainable farming practices, the budget calculations for improvements. A lot of her ideas were solid, they just never got implemented because she got sick. Jake doesn't know anything about horses or sustainable farming. No, but I bet there are people around here who do. What Jake knows is numbers and organization, which are actually pretty valuable skills for running a business. Maybe the problem isn't that he can't learn to be a rancher. Maybe the problem is that he's been trying to do everything exactly the way Sarah would have done it instead of figuring out how to do it the way Jake Morrison could do it." Dorothy was quiet for several minutes, and Maria could see her weighing the possibilities against the risks. Finally, she spoke. "If you're serious about this, there are some things you need to know. Jake hasn't been sleeping well since Sarah died. Some nights, he doesn't sleep at all, just sits in their bedroom looking through her things or staring out the window. The children are starting to have problems at school because they're worried about him all the time. And the bank has been calling about the mortgage payments." Maria felt her resolve strengthen rather than weaken. "How far behind is he on payments?" 3 months, maybe 4. "I've been helping when I can, but I'm on a fixed income." Dorothy's voice grew heavy with shame. "I should have done more, should have insisted he get help sooner." "You've done plenty," Maria said firmly. "You've been holding this family together, but you shouldn't have to carry that burden alone." They were interrupted by Emma bursting through the kitchen door, her cheeks flushed from playing outside. "Grandma Dorothy, Tommy found a baby bird that fell out of its nest. Can we help it?" Dorothy and Maria exchanged a look before following Emma outside to where Tommy was crouched beside a small tree, staring at a tiny bird on the ground. The bird was clearly injured, one wing hanging at an odd angle. "It's hurt," Tommy said, his voice full of concern. "We have to save it." Maria knelt beside the little boy, gently examining the bird. She could see immediately that its injuries were too severe, but she also saw the desperate hope in Tommy's eyes. This was about more than just a bird to him. "Sometimes, sweetheart, the kindest thing we can do is make sure an animal doesn't suffer," she said gently. "But we could take it to the doctor," Tommy insisted. "Like we took Daddy to the doctor." Emma, older and more aware of life's harsh realities, seemed to understand what Maria wasn't saying. "Tommy, I think the bird is too hurt for the doctor to fix." Tommy's face crumpled, and Maria could see all his accumulated grief about his mother, his fear about his father, and his confusion about his changing world pouring out in tears over a baby bird he'd never be able to save. It's not fair, he sobbed. And Maria knew he wasn't just talking about the bird anymore. She gathered the 5-year-old in her arms, letting him cry against her shoulder while Emma stood nearby, blinking back her own tears. Dorothy watched from a few feet away, her expression reflecting the helplessness that had become too familiar to all of them. "You're right," Maria told Tommy softly. "It's not fair. Sometimes bad things happen to good things, and there's nothing we can do to change it. But that doesn't mean we stop caring or stop trying to help when we can. Can we bury the bird?" Emma asked quietly. "Mama always said that when something dies, you should put it somewhere peaceful so it can rest." They held a small funeral for the bird in Sarah's flower garden, now overgrown with weeds but still retaining traces of its former beauty. Tommy picked wildflowers to put on the tiny grave while Emma said a few solemn words about hoping the bird would find its way to heaven. As they walked back to the house, Dorothy pulled Maria aside. "I've been thinking about what you said, and I want you to know that if you're really willing to try this, I'll support you however I can." "What changed your mind?" Dorothy gestured toward the children, who were now sitting on the porch steps sharing a snack she'd brought them. "Watching you with them just now. You didn't try to fix their sadness or talk them out of their feelings. You just let them be sad and help them through it. That's something Jake has been struggling with since Sarah died. He's so focused on trying to make everything better that he forgets sometimes they just need someone to acknowledge that things are hard right now." That afternoon, they drove to the hospital to visit Jake. He looked better than he had that morning, though still pale and weak from his bout of food poisoning. His face lit up when he saw Emma and Tommy, and Maria could see how much strength he drew from their presence. "The doctors say I can probably go home tomorrow," he told them, accepting careful hugs from both children. "Maria stayed at our house last night," Emma announced. "And this morning, she helped Tommy brush his teeth without crying." Jake looked surprised, his eyes moving from Emma to Maria with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Maria said, echoing what she'd told Dorothy earlier. "Actually, Jake, there's something I'd like to discuss with you, if you're feeling up to it." Dorothy distracted the children with a trip to the hospital cafeteria, leaving Maria alone with Jake to explain her proposal. She watched his expression shift from surprise to confusion to something that might have been hope before settling into the wariness that seemed to be his default state these days. "Maria, I appreciate what you're offering, I really do. But I can't afford to pay you what you'd be worth, and I can't ask you to put your life on hold for our problems." "What if it wasn't charity?" Maria asked. "What if it was a business proposition?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "What kind of business proposition?" "I looked through some of Sarah's plans yesterday. Her ideas for expanding the ranch's income streams, the boarding operation, the sustainable farming practices. What if we tried to implement some of those ideas? I could provide the labor and the initial investment capital from my savings, and we could split any profits." "Maria, you don't know anything about ranching. Neither did you 6 months ago," she pointed out. "But you're learning. And maybe between the two of us, we could figure it out faster than either of us could alone." Jake was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands folded on the hospital blanket. When he finally looked up, Maria could see tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. "Why would you want to do this?" he asked. "You barely know us." Maria thought about how to answer that question honestly. "I lost my mother 2 years ago. Cancer, like Sarah. I know what it's like to watch someone you love slip away while you feel completely helpless to stop it. And I know what it's like to feel lost afterward, like you don't know how to move forward without them." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I also know that sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory is to continue the work they started. Sarah had a vision for this ranch, for what it could become for your family. Maybe that vision doesn't have to die just because she did." Jake was crying now, though he tried to hide it by turning toward the window. "I miss her so much," he whispered. "Every morning I wake up, and for just a second I forget she's gone. And then I remember, and it's like losing her all over again." "That's grief," Maria said gently. "It's normal, and it's okay. But Sarah wouldn't want you to stop living because she's not here anymore. She'd want you to build the best life possible for Emma and Tommy." "I don't know how," Jake admitted. "I feel like I'm failing at everything. The ranch, the kids, work. I can't seem to get ahead of any of it." "You don't have to do it alone," Maria said. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Let me help. Not because you can't handle it yourself, but because some things are easier when you have support. They talked for another hour, working through the practical details of Maria's proposal. She would stay at the ranch for at least 3 months, helping with the children and the property while they figured out whether Sarah's business plans could actually be made to work. If the venture succeeded, they would split profits 50-50 after Maria recouped her initial investment. If it failed, at least they would have given it their best effort. I still don't understand why you want to take this risk, Jake said as they finalized the arrangement. Maybe because I need this as much as you do, Maria admitted. I've been drifting for the past 2 years, trying to figure out what comes next after losing my mom. Working with your family, trying to save something important that she built. Maybe that's exactly the purpose I've been looking for. When Dorothy returned with Emma and Tommy, they explained the new arrangement to the children. Emma listened with the serious attention she brought to all important matters, while Tommy seemed mainly excited about the prospect of Maria staying around longer. Does this mean you're going to live with us? Emma asked. For a while, Maria confirmed. If that's okay with you. Emma considered this carefully. Will you sleep in Mama's office? That's where people stay when they visit. Maria looked at Jake, who nodded. That would be perfect. That evening, Maria moved her belongings from the motel to the ranch. Sarah's office had been converted to a guest room after her death, though it still contained her desk and many of her books about ranching and sustainable agriculture. As Maria unpacked her few possessions, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was committing to help save not just a failing ranch, but a grieving family. The practical challenges were enormous, and the emotional stakes were even higher. But for the first time in 2 years, Maria felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next morning brought Jake's return from the hospital and the beginning of their new arrangement. Maria woke before dawn, as was her habit, and made coffee before anyone else stirred. She found Jake in the kitchen at 6:30, looking disoriented and still weak from his illness. You don't have to get up this early, he said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. I've always been an early riser, Maria replied. Besides, I want to get started on the barn project before the day gets too hot. They established a routine that first week that somehow felt both natural and carefully negotiated. Maria handled breakfast and getting the children ready for school, while Jake focused on the paperwork and phone calls that came with running even a struggling ranch. Afternoons were spent on barn organization, with Emma and Tommy helping when they got home from school. The children adapted to Maria's presence with surprising ease. Tommy, young enough to accept change as a normal part of life, simply incorporated her into his daily routine. Emma, more cautious and protective of her family's dynamics, watched Maria carefully for several days before gradually beginning to relax around her. The breakthrough came on Thursday afternoon when Emma found Maria studying one of Sarah's journals about horse care. Are you going to bring horses to live here? Emma asked. Your dad and I are thinking about it, Maria said. Your mama had some good ideas about boarding horses for other people. What do you think about that? Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile Maria had seen from her. Mama always said I could have my own horse when I got older. She said horses were good for teaching responsibility and patience. She was right about that, Maria agreed. Do you know much about taking care of horses? For the next hour, Emma shared everything her mother had taught her about horses, from proper grooming techniques to the importance of consistent feeding schedules. It was clear that Sarah had been preparing her daughter to be part of the ranch's future, passing on knowledge and values that connected the family to their land. That conversation led to Emma becoming Maria's unofficial assistant in researching the boarding operation. Together, they studied Sarah's business plan, calculated the costs of fence repairs and stable improvements, and even began reaching out to local horse owners about potential interest in boarding services. Meanwhile, Tommy appointed himself as the chief barn organizer, creating elaborate systems for tool storage that didn't make much practical sense, but gave him a sense of ownership and purpose in the project. Jake watched these developments with a mixture of amazement and something that might have been hope. For the first time since Sarah's death, his children seemed engaged and forward-looking rather than simply surviving each day. They're different with you. he told Maria one evening as they reviewed the day's progress on barn organization. How so? More like themselves, I guess. More like they were before Sarah got sick. I'd forgotten what Emma's laugh sounded like. Maria understood what he meant. Grief had a way of muffling everything, making even joy feel muted and tentative. But children, she'd learned, were remarkably resilient when given permission to hope again. They're amazing kids, she said. You and Sarah did something right in raising them. Jake's expression grew thoughtful. Sarah always said that children needed to feel useful, like they were contributing to something bigger than themselves. She involved them in ranch work from the time they could walk, always explaining how their help mattered. That shows in how they approach everything, Maria observed. Even when they're playing, they're thinking about how to make things better or more organized. That's not typical for kids their age. As the first week ended, Maria felt cautiously optimistic about their prospects. The barn was becoming functional again. The children were thriving with additional attention and structure, and Jake seemed to be sleeping better. But she also knew that the real challenges lay ahead. Organizing a barn was one thing. Making a failing ranch profitable was something else entirely. Saturday brought their first real test when Dorothy arrived with troubling news. The bank had called her, since she was listed as an emergency contact on Jake's accounts. They want to meet with you Monday morning, she told Jake, her expression grim. The loan officer mentioned something about accelerating the foreclosure timeline. Maria felt her stomach drop. She'd known the financial situation was serious, but she'd hoped they would have more time to implement their plans before facing any ultimatums. Jake's face went pale. How much time do we have? I don't know, Dorothy admitted. But it doesn't sound like very long. That evening, after the children were in bed, the three adults sat around the kitchen table with Sarah's financial records spread between them. The situation was worse than Maria had realized. The ranch was underwater by nearly $50,000, and the missed mortgage payments had triggered penalty clauses that made catching up almost impossible. There's got to be something we can do, Maria said, though even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Jake rubbed his temples, looking defeated. Maybe it's time to accept that this just isn't going to work. Maybe Emma and Tommy would be better off with Rachel in Colorado after all. Don't say that, Maria said sharply, surprising both Jake and Dorothy with her vehemence. We've barely started fighting for this place. You can't give up after 1 week. Maria, look at these numbers, Jake said, gesturing at the paperwork. Even if we could catch up on the mortgage, we'd need significant capital to implement any of Sarah's business plans. Where's that money going to come from? Maria stared at the financial documents, her mind racing through possibilities. The boarding operation would take months to become profitable, even if they started immediately. The sustainable farming initiatives would take even longer. They needed something that could generate income quickly while also moving toward their longer-term goals. What about agritourism? She said suddenly. Dorothy and Jake looked at her with confusion. City people pay good money for authentic ranch experiences, Maria explained, her excitement building as the idea took shape. Weekend retreats, corporate team-building events, educational programs for children. We could use Sarah's knowledge about sustainable farming and horse care as the foundation for educational programming. Jake shook his head. Maria, we don't have the facilities for that kind of operation. Not yet, Maria agreed. But we could start small. Day programs, maybe weekend retreats once we get the barn, and some basic accommodations set up. I have enough savings to cover the initial investment for basic improvements. Dorothy was studying Maria with new interest. How much are we talking about for initial investment? Maria did quick calculations in her head. Maybe $15,000 to get started with basic safety improvements, liability insurance, and marketing. We could reinvest profits into larger improvements as the business grows. And you'd be willing to risk $15,000 on an idea? Jake asked. I'd be willing to risk it on this family, Maria corrected. On Emma and Tommy's future, and on honoring what Sarah built here. They spent the rest of the evening researching agritourism operations online, looking at what other rural families were doing to supplement their income. The possibilities were intriguing, and by midnight they had the rough outline of a business plan that could potentially generate enough income to save the ranch. But, as Maria lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of Sarah's former office, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against time. Monday's meeting with the bank would determine whether they even had the opportunity to try their ambitious plan or whether the Morrison family's story on this ranch was about to come to an abrupt end. Outside her window, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch, owls calling in the distance, the rustle of wind through the cottonwood trees, the distant lowing of cattle in far pastures. It was a peaceful sound, the kind of quiet that city people paid premium prices to experience. Maybe that observation would prove to be the key to saving everything Sarah Morrison had worked to build. Or maybe Maria was just a woman from Phoenix who had gotten in over her head in rural Montana, about to learn the hard way that good intentions and determination weren't always enough to overcome impossible odds. Sometimes life changes direction in a single moment. Maria Santos thought she was just taking a temporary cleaning job to pay for her nursing school tuition. She never imagined that walking into a rundown barn on a struggling Montana ranch would lead her to become the lifeline for a grieving widower and his 2 young children. This is the true story of how a woman seeking her own fresh start became the unexpected guardian angel for a family falling apart, and how their lives became forever intertwined through tragedy, hope, and the healing power of human connection. The rusty gate creaked as Maria Santos pushed it open, the sound echoing across the empty fields of the Broken Arrow Ranch. She pulled her old Honda further up the dirt road, gravel crunching under the tires as she approached the weathered farmhouse. The job posting had been simple enough. Clean barn and outbuildings, temporary position, cash payment. What it hadn't mentioned was the sense of abandonment that seemed to hang over the entire property like morning fog. Maria parked near the barn and stepped out, adjusting the bandana she'd tied around her dark hair. At 28, she'd cleaned enough places to know what hard work looked like, but this felt different. The barn doors hung slightly crooked on their hinges, and weeds grew tall around the foundation. Paint peeled from the farmhouse in long strips, and a child's forgotten bicycle lay on its side near the porch steps. She knocked on the farmhouse door, hearing footsteps inside before it opened to reveal a man who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Jake Morrison was probably in his early 30s, but grief had aged him. His brown hair needed cutting, his flannel shirt was wrinkled, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone barely keeping his head above water. "You must be Maria," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Thanks for coming out. I know it's not much of a job, but I need to get this place ready to sell." Through the screen door, Maria could see the chaos inside. Dishes piled in the sink, laundry scattered on furniture, toys abandoned on the floor. Somewhere in the house, she heard the sound of children's voices, though they seemed unusually quiet. "The barn's pretty rough," Jake continued, rubbing his stubbled jaw. "My wife used to keep everything organized out there, but since he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Anyway, it's been 6 months, and I just can't seem to get on top of things." Maria nodded, understanding more than he probably realized. She'd seen enough struggling families in her neighborhood back in Phoenix. "Don't worry about it. I'll take a look and see what needs doing." Jake led her around to the barn, and Maria had to hide her surprise at the condition inside. It wasn't just dirty, it was like a tornado had hit. Tools scattered everywhere, hay bales moldering in corners, and years of accumulated ranch supplies creating a maze of obstacles. But underneath the chaos, she could see the bones of a well-built structure. "Sarah always said this barn had good bones," Jake said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "She grew up here, inherited the place from her parents. Had all these plans for fixing it up, maybe boarding horses for extra income." His voice cracked slightly. "Cancer took her before we could do any of that." Maria felt her heart squeeze. She'd lost her own mother to cancer just 2 years ago, part of what had driven her to pursue nursing. "I'm sorry for your loss." Jake nodded, staring at a workbench covered in dust. "The kids don't understand why we have to leave. Emma's 8, and Tommy just turned 5. This is the only home they've ever known. But I can't keep up with the ranch work and take care of them too. My job in town barely covers the bills as it is." Through the barn's back window, Maria could see 2 small figures playing in the overgrown yard. The girl, Emma, was pushing her little brother on an old tire swing, both of them moving with the listless energy of children who'd grown too accustomed to sadness. "I can't pay much," Jay continued. $50 a day, and it might take a week or more to get everything sorted and cleaned out. Maria looked around the barn again, calculating the work involved. It would take at least 10 days to do the job properly, maybe 2 weeks. The money wasn't great, but she'd planned to spend a few weeks in Montana anyway, taking a break from Phoenix before starting nursing school in the fall. Her savings could cover her motel room for a while. That sounds fair, she said. When do you want me to start? Relief flooded Jake's face. Tomorrow, if that works for you. I have to drive down to Billings for work. Won't be back until evening. The kids will be at their grandmother's in town. Maria spent the next hour walking through the barn, making mental notes about what needed to be done. She found remnants of Sarah Morrison's presence everywhere. A careful labeling system for tools, now scattered and ignored. Flower boxes she'd built for herbs, now filled with weeds. A small office area with a desk covered in ranch records and plans that would never be completed. As she prepared to leave, Emma Morrison approached the barn. She was a serious little girl with her father's brown hair and eyes that seemed too old for her face. Are you going to clean the barn? Emma asked. That's the plan, Maria replied gently. Your dad hired me to help get things organized. Emma nodded solemnly. Mama used to keep it really neat. She said the barn was the heart of the ranch, and you had to take care of its heart if you wanted the rest to stay healthy. The simple wisdom of the child's words hit Maria harder than she'd expected. Your mama sounds like she was very smart. She was, Emma said matter-of-factly. She's in heaven now, but sometimes I still hear her humming when I'm out here. Maria's throat tightened. What would she hum? Emma thought for a moment, then began humming a gentle melody, something soft and comforting. It reminded Maria of lullabies her own mother used to sing, back when the world felt safer and more predictable. That evening, Maria sat in her motel room planning her approach to the barn project. She could have treated it as just another cleaning job, in and out as quickly as possible. But something about the Morrison family had gotten under her skin. Maybe it was recognizing the particular exhaustion of grief, or maybe it was seeing how hard Jake was trying to hold everything together for his children while falling apart himself. She thought about Emma's words about the barn being the heart of the ranch. There was something profound about that observation, something that made Maria want to do more than just clean. She wanted to restore some sense of order and peace to a place that had clearly once been loved. The next morning, Maria arrived at the ranch early, before the Montana sun had burned off the dew. Jake was loading the kids into his pickup truck, Emma holding a backpack that looked too big for her shoulders while Tommy clutched a stuffed dinosaur. Their grandmother will keep them until I get back from Billings, Jake explained, looking guilty about leaving them again. Mrs. Patterson's been a lifesaver since Sarah died, but I know it's a lot to ask of her. Maria watched Emma help her little brother into his car seat, the 8-year-old moving with the careful competence of a child who'd been forced to grow up too fast. They seem like good kids. They are, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. Too good. They deserve better than this mess I've made of everything. After Jake left with the children, Maria stood alone in the silent barnyard. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and distant mountains. She could see why Sarah Morrison had loved this place enough to fight for it. Maria started by clearing pathways through the barn, moving the scattered tools and supplies into organized piles. As she worked, she began to understand the system Sarah had created. Everything had its place, carefully thought out for efficiency and safety. The chaos wasn't the result of poor planning. It was the result of a system abandoned by someone too overwhelmed to maintain it. 3 hours into the work, Maria heard a vehicle approaching. She looked up to see an older woman getting out of a beige sedan, moving with the determined stride of someone on a mission. The woman was probably in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, and clothes that suggested she didn't shy away from hard work. You must be the woman Jake hired to clean the barn, she said, extending a weathered hand. I'm Dorothy Patterson, Sarah's mother. Maria shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the way Dorothy's eyes were already scanning the barn's interior. Maria Santos, I'm sorry for the loss of your daughter. Dorothy's expression softened slightly. Thank you. Sarah loved this place more than life itself. Breaks my heart to see it like this, but I understand why Jake feels like he has no choice. The older woman stepped into the barn, running her fingers along the workbench where Sarah had once planned ranch improvements. She had such dreams for this place. Wanted to build it into something the kids could be proud of, maybe even take over someday. It has good bones, Maria said, echoing Sarah's words as Jake had shared them. Dorothy looked at her sharply. That's exactly what Sarah used to say. You didn't know her, did you? Maria shook her head. No, but I can see her influence everywhere. She built something special here. They worked together for the rest of the morning, Dorothy sharing stories about Sarah while helping to sort through years of accumulated ranch supplies. Maria learned that Sarah had been a teacher before marrying Jake, that she'd inherited the ranch when her father died suddenly, and that she'd thrown herself into learning ranching with the same dedication she'd once brought to her classroom. She was stubborn, Dorothy said with obvious pride. When the doctors told her the cancer was aggressive, she spent her last good months teaching Jake everything she could about running the ranch. Made detailed notes about everything from which pastures to rotate to how to fix the old tractor. She thought if she could just give him enough information, he'd be able to manage. But it didn't work out that way. Dorothy shook her head sadly. Jake's a good man, but he's not a rancher. He's an accountant who fell in love with a woman who happened to own a ranch. After Sarah died, he tried to follow her notes, but ranching isn't something you can learn from a manual. It takes years of experience, and he was trying to figure it out while grieving and raising two small children. As they organized tools and supplies, Maria began to see the full scope of what Sarah had been trying to build. There were plans for expanded pastures, notes about sustainable farming practices, and detailed budgets for improvements that would have made the ranch profitable. It was the work of someone who'd seen this place not as it was, but as it could become. The children must miss her terribly, Maria said. Every day, Dorothy confirmed. Emma tries to be strong for her little brother, but she's just a baby herself. And Tommy keeps asking when Mama's coming home from heaven. Jake does his best, but he's drowning. Some days I think he's only holding on because the kids need him to. Late in the afternoon, Dorothy left to pick up Emma and Tommy from a neighbor who'd been watching them. Maria continued working, making significant progress in clearing the barn's main area. As the sun began to set, she heard vehicles approaching and knew Jake had returned from Billings. She stepped outside to see him getting out of his truck, moving with the exhausted shuffle of someone who'd put in a long day on top of too many long days. Emma and Tommy tumbled out of Dorothy's car, their brief energy from seeing their father already fading into the subdued quiet that seemed to characterize their daily life. How did it go? Jake asked, looking toward the barn with a mixture of hope and dread. See for yourself, Maria said. Jake walked into the barn and stopped short. The main pathway was clear, tools were organized into logical groupings, and the whole space already looked more functional. It wasn't finished, not by a long shot, but it was no longer the overwhelming disaster it had been that morning. I can't believe you got this much done in one day, he said, his voice filled with something Maria hadn't heard before, hope. Emma appeared at her father's elbow, studying the transformed space with serious eyes. It looks like Mama's barn again, she said quietly. The simple observation hit everyone present. Even 5-year-old Tommy seemed to sense the significance of the moment, looking around with wide eyes before announcing, "It's not scary anymore." Jake knelt down to his children's level. "What do you think? Should we keep working on it?" Emma nodded solemnly. Mama would want it to be beautiful again. As Maria gathered her things to leave, she felt something shift in her understanding of the job she'd taken on. This wasn't just about cleaning a barn anymore. It was about restoring something precious that had been lost, about giving a grieving family one small piece of their old life back. Driving back to her motel, Maria thought about Emma's observation that the barn looked like her mother's again. She wondered what it would take to make the whole ranch feel that way, to restore not just the physical space, but the sense of possibility and purpose that Sarah Morrison had built there. The next morning brought storm clouds and the promise of rain, but Maria arrived at the ranch determined to make even more progress. She was surprised to find Jake's truck still in the driveway and Emma sitting on the porch steps, still in her pajamas. "Is everything okay?" Maria asked, approaching the little girl. Emma looked up with worried eyes. "Daddy's sick. He's been throwing up all night, and he's really hot. He was supposed to go to work, but He can't even get out of bed. Maria felt her nursing instincts kick in immediately. She'd completed 2 years of pre-nursing coursework and had worked as a certified nursing assistant before deciding to return to school. "Can I check on him?" Emma nodded and led Maria into the house, which looked even more chaotic than it had 2 days earlier. Dishes from several meals sat unwashed in the sink, laundry overflowed from baskets, and toys were scattered everywhere. The smell of sickness hung in the air. They found Jake in the master bedroom, burning with fever and barely conscious. Maria touched his forehead and knew immediately that he needed medical attention. His temperature felt dangerously high, and he was showing signs of severe dehydration. "Emma, honey, where's your grandmother's phone number?" Maria asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "On the refrigerator," Emma replied, her 8-year-old composure beginning to crack. "Is Daddy going to be okay?" Maria found the number and called Dorothy, quickly explaining the situation. Within 20 minutes, the older woman arrived and helped Maria get Jake into her car for the drive to the county hospital. Emma and Tommy were left with a neighbor, both children fighting back tears as they watched their father being taken away. At the hospital, doctors determined that Jake had contracted a severe case of food poisoning, possibly from the truck stop where he'd eaten lunch during his trip to Billings. He was severely dehydrated and would need to stay in the hospital for at least 2 days. Dorothy and Maria sat in the waiting room while Jake received 4 fluids and medication. The older woman looked exhausted, and Maria could see the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "I can't keep taking care of those children full-time," Dorothy said quietly. "I'm 67 years old, and I have my own health issues. I love Emma and Tommy more than life itself, but I'm not equipped to be their primary caregiver." "What about other family?" Maria asked. "Jake's parents are in Florida, and they're not in good health either. Sarah was an only child, so I'm really all the children have." Dorothy rubbed her temples. "I've been trying to help Jake see that he needs to make some hard decisions about their future." Maria thought about Emma and Tommy, about the way they'd both lit up when they saw the barn looking more like their mothers again. "What kind of decisions?" "His sister in Colorado has offered to take the children temporarily. She has kids of her own and could provide stability while Jake gets back on his feet. But he's terrified of letting them go, even temporarily." The idea of separating the Morrison family made Maria's chest tight. She'd seen enough broken families to know that sometimes children who were sent away temporarily never made it home again. "There has to be another option," she said. Dorothy looked at her with tired eyes. "Like what?" "Jake can't afford to hire help, and he can't continue trying to do everything himself. Something has to give, and I'm afraid it's going to be his relationship with his children." That evening, Maria returned to the ranch to check on Emma and Tommy. The neighbor who'd been watching them had gone home, and Dorothy was struggling to manage bedtime routines while fielding calls from Jake's work about his absence. Maria found Emma trying to help Tommy brush his teeth while the 5-year-old fought back tears about wanting his daddy. The bathroom was a disaster, with toothpaste smeared on the counter and water puddles on the floor. "Let me help," Maria offered, stepping in to guide Tommy through his bedtime routine, while Emma watched with relief. As she tucked Tommy into his bed, the little boy grabbed her hand. "Are you going to leave too?" he asked, his voice small and frightened. The question hit Maria like a physical blow. In the space of 3 days, she'd somehow become part of the Morrison family's daily rhythm, and the children were already depending on her presence. "I'm not going anywhere tonight," she said gently, which seemed to satisfy Tommy enough to let him fall asleep. Emma was harder to settle. The 8-year-old had too many worries for her age, and she peppered Maria with questions about her father's condition and what would happen next. "Will we have to go live with Aunt Rachel?" Emma asked, naming Jake's sister in Colorado. "I don't know, sweetheart. That's for your daddy to decide when he's feeling better." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I don't want to leave. Mama's here." The simple statement broke Maria's heart. She understood what Emma meant. Not that Sarah's ghost haunted the ranch, but that this place held all the memories and connections that kept Sarah alive in her children's hearts. "Tell me about your mama," Maria said, settling into the chair beside Emma's bed. For the next hour, Emma shared stories about Sarah Morrison, how she used to read bedtime stories with different voices for all the characters, how she taught Emma to braid her own hair, helped Tommy learn to ride his bicycle, how she sang while doing chores, and always had time to answer questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how baby animals were born. She said the ranch was our family's story, Emma concluded, that every pasture and building had memories in it, and that's why it was important to take care of it all. Maria thought about that observation as she finally settled onto the couch for the night, having convinced Dorothy to go home and rest. The ranch as a family story that felt more accurate than thinking of it as just property or even a home. It was a narrative that connected generations, a place where Sarah's parents had built something meaningful and passed it on to their daughter, who had planned to pass it on to her own children. Now that story was at risk of ending, not because the ranch couldn't be successful, but because grief and circumstances had overwhelmed the people who were supposed to be its next chapter. Maria spent a restless night on the Morrisons' couch, listening to the old house settle around her and thinking about Emma's words. By morning, she'd reached a decision that surprised even her. When Dorothy arrived to check on the children, Maria was already making breakfast and had somehow managed to get both kids dressed and ready for the day. "You didn't have to stay the night," Dorothy said, though she looked relieved. "I wanted to," Maria replied honestly. "Dorothy, I need to talk to you about something." They sent Emma and Tommy outside to play while they talked in the kitchen. Maria took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to propose would sound crazy to someone who'd just met her a few days ago. "I want to stay," she said. "Not just to clean the barn, but to help with everything. The kids, the house, maybe even learn enough about the ranch to help Jake figure out if there's a way to make it work." Dorothy stared at her. "Maria, you barely know this family." "I know enough," Maria said firmly. "I know that Jake is a good father who's overwhelmed by circumstances. I know that Emma and Tommy are amazing kids who've already lost their mother and shouldn't have to lose their home too. And I know that this place meant everything to Sarah Morrison, which means it should mean something to her children. But you have your own life, your own plans." Maria thought about her nursing school plans, about the life she'd mapped out in Phoenix. It was a good life, a practical life, but somehow it felt less important than the family sitting in crisis in this Montana farmhouse. "My plans can wait," she said. "These children can't."